Hi, my name is Valerie Funstein, and I am the chairperson for the Literacy and Education Committee for the National Federation of Republican Women. And I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker, which will be Vivek Ramaswamy. Welcome, Vivek, to our group.
Well, thank you for having me, Valerie. We scheduled this promptly because I love you guys. This is a great group. I've gone to many of your sort of state chapter events across the country, but I love the passion of the mothers and the women who are going to, I think, be a critical part of saving our country. My wife, Apurva, she knows I'm participating today, but she sends her regards and loves you guys as well. And the only trouble is, were we going to schedule this way out in the future or in this window before the election? And so in the run up to the election, it's so crazy. But I thought actually that may have been an interesting time, even just to take a little bit of time to talk to you both about the book, but also where I think that fits in the path to winning, hopefully back the country. But I don't view November 5th as some kind of destination. And it's a big part of why I wrote this book. I view November 5th as the starting line.
Good. Well, we're with you with this journey. So I'm just going to say you've had several books published, by the way.
Yeah.
You're a New York Times best-selling author, and you share your political conservative beliefs proudly, and we're very excited to have you. I'd like to talk about the most recently released book, Truths. So your book has an interesting format. I speed read this week. It's written in chapters of concluding beliefs. Each is summarized with a list of truths, which I thought was an incredible format. And from God to genders to climate to conspiracies, your chapters hit upon virtually every debate among Americans today. Now, you explain how you suggest this book will serve to arm the reader for friendly debates. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So how do you suggest that?
It was an outgrowth of my own campaign experience over the last year, where I had experiences where I would dunk on the left, with Don Lemon, I sparred, or, moments like that. But those weren't my favorite moments actually from the campaign. My favorite moments were when we would have a protester who disagreed, generally from the left, that would come into the event, think they were interrupting it. And one of the decisions I made during this campaign was, we're actually going to do things a little differently. We'll give them the microphone and allow them to be heard, as long as they respect everyone else who's in the room and hear their opinions as well. And there were some amazing things that came out of that, actually, learnings about relationships with how people think on the left that, I think we actually even managed to change some minds. And so the question I got from people across the country was, how do I do this in my everyday life? And this book was an outgrowth of that, to arm the reader with their ability to talk to not just the people who agree with us, but the people who don't. And so it's in some ways easier to read than my other books, Woke Inc., or certainly one of my books is called Capitalist Punishment, about the ESG movement. Those get very technical and very scholarly. This is not supposed to be a scholarly book. This is actually a book that's designed to open up dinner table conversations. The premise is that we can disagree like hell and still get together at the dinner table at the end of it. That's the America I miss, and that's the America I think we need to revive. But one of the things I talk about in this book is the trap we sometimes fall into is that we think that being respectful of our fellow citizens means telling them some sort of modified version of what we believe. And here's my view: is when you're the only person in a room who believes what you do, stand up and say it. Say it with a spine, but also say it with respect. But part of respect is that you respect your neighbor enough to tell them what you actually think, not some woke-washed version of it. And so this is, in some ways, the goal of the book is to arm the reader with those arguments. And in each of these chapters, right, so I'll give you some of the titles. God is real. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The chapter entitled, There Are Two Genders, very controversial one there. You have one, Reverse Racism is Racism. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. And I can give you the rest of the chapter titles too. But one of the things I try to do is, those may sound so obvious. So every one of these chapter titles is based on how obvious is it, and the ratio of that to how controversial it is. The 10 chapters of this book are where the ratio of being obvious to controversial is a really high ratio. But it sounds obvious to those who are reading it. So one of the things I try to do in each chapter is give the best possible argument for the other side. God is real. Well, what are the best possible counterarguments for the other side? I cite some of the most popular and thoughtful and intelligent secular atheists in their arguments that they've made. The argument that there are two genders. Examine the best possible arguments for the other side that would deny that statement. And one of the things I found in my life and in my career, and even over the course of my presidential campaign, is that if you can't really offer the best statement for the other side, then you don't know what you actually believe. But when you do, you actually emerge even stronger with your own convictions. And so that's what this book calls upon the reader to do. But I also think that that's how we get our country back, is all of us being willing to engage with the people who disagree with us most. And I think that the way we're going to do that is the last point I'll make about the character of the book is actually by adopting, sometimes there's a choice where you're going to compromise. You always have to compromise somewhere as a country. So the question is, do you want to compromise on style or do you want to compromise on substance? So one of the things I found is when you're unwilling to compromise on style, when push comes to shove, when laws go through Congress or whatever, you end up compromising on the substance. I'd love it the other way around, where I don't want to compromise on principle. I don't want to compromise on substance, but I am willing to compromise on style, on the ability to say that we can be a little bit more amicable and even empathetic in the way we make our arguments, but that doesn't mean we're going to waver on where we land on our principles at the end of it. That was one of my learnings from the campaign, because frankly, I had experiences of trying both. And I find that I'd rather compromise on the style element of it than to ever compromise on principle, because otherwise, what's the point of even going through all this in the first place? So that too is something that this book aims to arm the reader with, is the ability to empathetically make arguments to those who we may disagree with most deeply, even to understand their point of view better than we might today, but to use that in service of actually persuading our fellow Americans, not just defeating them, but persuading them. That's the goal of this book.
Well, it's great. And getting back to that point on style, one of your chapters is nationalism isn't a bad word.
Yeah.
And nationalism is not the only word that has been abducted. Other words that come to mind are matter, choice, fascism. Some pronouns also come to mind. So how can we protect and defend our principles while also keeping our own language from being kidnapped and manipulated?
Yeah, so this is a good question. Orwell famously said the best way to control the mind of a society is to control its language first. And, one of the things the introduction to the book, I actually cite the recent CEO of NPR, National Public Radio, who criticized many in this country for the wrongful obsession over the truth distracts us from the things that are actually more important. And I don't try to distort her view. I'm interested in understanding it, which is to say that in her view, there are other objectives that are more important than getting to what is actually true. Getting along with your fellow citizens, the idea of making sure that people feel better and more respected might be more important than seeking the truth. So that's the argument she makes. That's the other side, the best version of the other side we're up against. And my view is actually the way you respect somebody is you tell them the truth, and that actually builds a stronger relationship for the long run, even if that might be at times painful in the short run. So on the point about nationalism isn't a bad word, one of the things that we ought to do better is use the words that we intend to use without fear of what the backlash is going to be. One of the areas we see this is with the word capitalism. So one of the truths I embraced in the campaign was capitalism is the best known system to lift people up from poverty. It's historically proven for the last several centuries of human history. But one of the things you'll hear amongst even Republican pollsters now and Republican political consultants, I get this advice, is they say, don't say the word capitalism. Here are the words that poll test a little bit better: free enterprise or economic mobility. Say that. Don't say capitalism, because capitalism has a negative connotation. And surely they would tell me the same about nationalism. I view it the other way around, is that actually just because somebody else has attached a negative connotation to a word that inherently means something worthy and good doesn't mean that we shy away from it. And now that's something that we can't say anymore. No, to the contrary, the best way to, first of all, solve a problem is to name it. Right? This happened on the woke left. Initially, they said, let's be woke. That's what came from the left. Then when conservatives started to say it, they say, oh, no. Now you've just actually created a new type of venom or conspiracy. I think that in either direction, when you see a problem, the first step is name the problem. That's the first step to solving it. And when you have a virtue, the step to reviving that virtue is to name that virtue too. And just because somebody else has managed to wrap a connotation around it, which is something the left is actually masterful at, that doesn't mean that we have to wither like wilting flowers. I think it actually means that we have to now more than ever stand up with the spine and reclaim even our language, which otherwise risks being taken from us. And that too is what's at issue, by the way, in the whole transgender debate. in a way that I expose in this book as well.
Sure. And as a matter of fact, the conversation comes to mind when Dr. Carson and I were working on the book, America Matters. We deliberately chose the word matters to try to take the word back. And it's
Yes.
very important. So now you also mentioned that convictions mean nothing unless you're willing to sacrifice to defend them. Now, on the
Yeah.
call today are hundreds of our members, but there are thousands more of us taking time away from family, friends, making those sacrifices today. We knock on doors, we attend rallies, raise campaign funds and awareness. So, what is your message to our members who are the women on the right?
Yeah. So my message is there's been a culture of fear that has spread across our country like an epidemic. Right? Fear of losing your jobs, fear of your kids getting a bad grade in school, fear of your small business facing a boycott, whatever it is. And that culture of fear has replaced our culture of free speech in America. And if you want to know what is the best measure of the health of American democracy, right? You hear a lot about our democracy, protecting our democracy these days. Well, I think the best measure of the health of our democracy, it's not the number of green pieces of paper in our bank account. At the end of the day, what does that matter if our kids don't grow up in a country where they can even live an American dream? It isn't even the number of ballots we cast every November. I mean, what's the point of going through the motion if you don't actually have a thriving democracy that protects its freedoms? I think the best measure of the health of our democracy is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. And right now we are doing poorly. But that doesn't mean that we can't change it, because I think fear has been infectious, but courage can be contagious too. It just requires more of us to actually show it. And so what is this word courage? So I come back down to this. I think courage means two things, right? One is you have to have convictions in the first place, but that's not good enough. It's important, it's vital, but it's not good enough. You have to be willing to make a sacrifice to fight for those convictions. That's what our founding fathers did, right? I think that there were 56 men in that case who signed the Declaration of Independence, and 12 of them died, had their homes ransacked and burned to the ground by the British. 9 more of them died in the American Revolution. 5 of them were captured by the British and tortured until their deaths, and 3 more of them had their own kids die in the American Revolution. They made a sacrifice for their convictions. And now speaking to the leading women amongst the conservative movement in America, well, more than 56 women on this call, but I think that revive that spirit of the 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence. And I think that we live in a 1776 kind of moment today. And that is a special time to be alive, actually. And that's one of the things in the final chapter of the book I explore is that founding culture that set our country into motion. It wasn't just the principles in the Constitution. It was a founding culture of ambition and curiosity and boundlessness. That's part of what we miss. And I say this as a father of 2 sons myself. I think that what the next generation misses. But we don't have to sit here and regret that. It's up to us to actually revive it. And so, I just want to say, Valerie, I mean, I'm, I was in 2 different, I've been in 3 states in the last 12 hours, mostly swing states, and headed to more very shortly. But it was even in the midst of this final sprint to the finish line, it was important to me to take time with one of my favorite groups. I love what you all do, loved coming to your events, tell the rest of the women in the national organization and your chapters that we're so grateful for you and your fight for this country. It's a country worth saving, and we're counting on you to do it. And if I can ever be helpful to you all along the way, let me know. And, as it relates to the book, I mean, this is not really a serious commercial endeavor for me, but I wrote it because it's something that I hope arms every one of you and all of your members with the ability to not only push back, but to stand for our own alternative vision, but to do it in a way that's graceful rather than combative. That's my hope. And so I hope all of you are able to, to secure a copy of it and share it with your kids. If anything, I would ask actually, you read it and your husbands and other family members read it, but share it with your kids. That's actually what I would love most is the messages of that book. And if you do, I'd be immensely grateful.
I do have another question for you.
Sure. Last one before I have to get dragged down next travel.
All right, you got this. As becoming customary for our Zoom interviews, we'll ask you now.
Sure.
Who would you like to challenge to be interviewed by the NFRW?
Oh. That's a good question. You got so many good choices. I'd suggest John Fetterman. would be pretty interesting.
Would you like to challenge him? I'd like to hear you challenge him.
I'll challenge John Fetterman to take an interview with the National Federation of Republican Women. And I think that he's man enough to accept it, because I've watched his evolution. And I picked him in particular because he's somebody who isn't afraid to buck his party at times, which tells me the guy at least has a spine. And, you know, I don't agree with him on most subjects, but I'll always respect somebody who is actually, you know, who's actually willing to speak their mind. Now, I saw someone say, challenge Kamala. I don't want it to be a worthless challenge. I want it to be somebody who's actually going to accept it and has independent thoughts, which is something that I don't believe Kamala Harris has. And out of respect to you all, I think you deserve someone who has independent thoughts to be.
And I'd also like you to consider to challenge a Republican, a fellow Republican.
Good. Let me think
Well,
about
here's
that.
your chance. Think about it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you.
Challenge, you know, let me think about that right now. I think a good person to be interviewed by you all would be on the right, not just like a Liz Cheney Republican, because that's effective like the other side, but an actual, yeah. I think it would be fruitful for you to challenge Josh Hawley to be interviewed. I think he'd be pretty interesting. He's a smart guy, has some different views than me, and especially on that point relating to the virtues of capitalism. You know, I think you could have, he's a smart man. I respect him. We don't always agree on every subject, but I think he would be man enough to accept.
Well, I do want to thank you for being with us. I know your schedule is really tight, and we do appreciate you spending the time with us. And if we could get back to you, if we have any questions, we will be more than happy to share them with you.
Thank you, guys. All the best, and please do, you know, share the book link with everybody, and let me know what you think, and we can actually do a debrief after you all have read it, because I'm hopeful that it actually arms you all to do what you need. So thanks so much.
Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.